The air in the 30th floor conference room was worth more per cubic foot than most people make in a year, and it was just as sterile. He pushed the papers across the mahogany expanse, his $50,000 Richard Mille watch catching the light. "Sign it, Catherine." His voice was bored, an order given to a servant. This was Marcus Thorne, a man who didn't request. He dictated. His lawyers, a row of identical gray suits from Skadden Arps, looked on. They saw a trophy wife about to be put out to pasture, but they didn't see her hand. It was steady. They didn't see her eyes. They were clear, and they certainly didn't see the smile that touched her lips as she picked up the pen. The room was a monument to corporate power. It wasn't just a meeting room, it was a stage meticulously designed by the interiors firm Meyer Davis to project invincibility. The table was a single 40-foot slab of polished black mahogany, reflecting the grim New York skyline like a dark mirror. The chairs were upholstered in supple hand-stitched leather. On the walls hung imposing abstract art, a Rothko, Klein pieces that weren't meant to be enjoyed but to be owned. Catherine Brown, soon to be Catherine Rostova again, a name she hadn't used in a decade, sat at one end. She felt impossibly small, but she had learned to project. Today she was not the trembling girl Marcus had discovered. She wore a simple navy blue sheath dress by the row. It was elegant, anonymous, and most importantly, she had bought it herself with one of the few credit cards he didn't monitor. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe chignon. No jewelry save the thin gold watch her father had given her, the one Marcus had always tried to replace with a diamond-encrusted trinket from Cartier. At the other end, flanked by his legal team, sat Marcus Thorne. Marcus was a titan, or so the financial magazines called him. He was the founder of Thorne Capital, a private equity behemoth known for its ruthless vulture tactics. He'd buy distressed companies, strip them for parts, and sell the rest for scrap, all while delivering staggering returns to his investors. He was handsome in a cruel, angular way. His bespoke suit from Anderson & Shepherd fit him like a second skin. He exuded an aura of such profound arrogance that it seemed to lower the temperature of the room. His lead counsel, David Cobre, a senior partner at Wachtell, Lipton, Rosen & Katz, slid the final divorce settlement across the table. Cobre was the best a man who didn't argue law. He argued leverage. "Mrs. Thorne," Cobre began, his voice a smooth, expensive baritone. "We believe you'll find this equitable. It is, in fact, significantly more generous than the prenuptial agreement dictates." Catherine didn't look at him. Her eyes were fixed on Marcus. He was already checking his phone, bored with the proceedings. He'd already moved on. His new girlfriend, a 22-year-old model, was probably waiting in the lobby of his new penthouse. "Equitable," Catherine repeated, her voice soft. The word hung in the air. Cobre cleared his throat, sensing a snag. "A lump sum payment of $5 million. The apartment in Tribeca, and of course the confidentiality agreement is absolute and binding in perpetuity across all known and future universes." He almost smiled at his own legal flourish. $5 million. To anyone else, a fortune. To Marcus Thorne, it was what he found between his sofa cushions. Their primary estate in Greenwich was worth $80 million. The Hamptons beach house, $45 million. The art she was looking at, easily $100 million. His net worth was estimated at $12.4 billion. "He's offering me 0.04% of his wealth," Catherine said, still looking at Marcus. Cobre's professional mask twitched. "Your contributions to the marriage, while appreciated, were not financial, Mrs. Thorne. The prenup is ironclad. This is a gift." Finally, Marcus looked up, his blue eyes as cold as the glass tower they sat in. "Sign it, Catherine. Don't be tedious. You were a researcher at Sotheby's when I met you. You were cataloging other people's lives. I gave you a life. Now I'm ungiving it. Take the money and go." There it was. The dismissal. The casual cruelty that had become her entire world. For 10 years she had been his lovely little ornament. He'd praised her beauty, Her grace at his endless galas at the Met or the Frick, her ability to speak 4 languages to charm his international investors. But he'd systematically dismissed her intellect. He'd forgotten she had a dual-degree PhD in art history and forensic economics from Yale. He'd forgotten that to catalog art, you must first understand value. "It's a generous offer, Marcus," she said. Her voice was steady. Marcus leaned back triumphant. He gestured to the papers. "Then sign. I have a 1 p.m. at Per se." Catherine ignored the pen. "5 million is fine." Cobre relaxed. The Skadden Arps lawyers relaxed. "But," she continued, "I want one other thing. A trinket. For sentimental value." Marcus sighed, annoyed. "What?" "The Cartier necklace. The diamond's fine. Tell my assistant to—" "No," Catherine said. She reached into her simple leather tote bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper folded neatly. It was not a document from her own small-time lawyer who sat pale and silent beside her. It was a document she had drafted. She slid it across the table. "I want that." Cobre snatched it up, his eyes scanning it. His brow furrowed in confusion. "This is an asset transfer document for a single asset LLC. Trident Holdings LLC." He looked at Marcus. "Is this one of your shell companies? The asset listed is a car." Marcus, who had been looking at his phone, froze. His head snapped up. The boredom was gone. The blood drained from his face, leaving only a dull, waxy pallor. "What did you say?" he whispered. Catherine met his gaze. The first trace of a smile appeared. "Trident Holdings. It's registered in the Cayman Islands. It has one asset, a 2017 Pagani Huayra Roadster, the bespoke one, the one you call the Trident. I want it." The first 5 years had been a blur of impossible luxury. Marcus Thorne didn't just woo Catherine Rostova. He acquired her. She was working provenance research at Sotheby's, an academic with a brilliant mind and a closet full of J. Crew. He was a force of nature, a client bidding on a Cézanne. He'd invited her to dinner to discuss the piece, and by dessert he was discussing her future. He'd swept her into a world of private jets, spontaneous trips to Lake Como, and front-row seats at Milan Fashion Week. He bought her a new wardrobe, taught her which designers to wear Loro Piana for daytime, Oscar de la Renta for evening, and which artist to name-drop. She was intelligent, a quick study. She became the perfect Thorne wife. But the guilt began to flake. Marcus wasn't a partner. He was a curator. He curated her friends, her schedule, her opinions, her PhD in economics. Adorable, he'd called it. "But you don't need to worry your pretty little head about numbers anymore, darling. I have people for that." He isolated her. Her friends from academia faded away, intimidated by the armed guards at the Greenwich estate. Her family, humble and hard-working, were treated as novelties, then dismissed. She was alone, surrounded by staff in a 30,000-square-foot museum of a house. The cruelty at first was subtle. He'd correct her in front of his powerful friends. Catherine meant to say, he'd begin cutting her off. He'd undermine her charity work, changing her chosen foundation at the last minute to one of his own preference. Then came the infidelity. It was as casual and frequent as his stock trades. She'd find receipts from the bungalows at the Chateau Marmont, or a stray earring so cliché in the pocket of his tuxedo. When she first confronted him, he didn't even deny it. "Catherine, don't be provincial," he'd scoffed, adjusting his tie. "I am a man of significant appetites. It means nothing. It's just friction. You are my wife. That is a position, a title. Behave accordingly." She'd shattered. She'd spent weeks and a days weeping in a house so large no one could hear her. She considered leaving. She'd even met with a lawyer, a kind woman who had taken one look at the prenuptial agreement and blanched. "Catherine," the lawyer had said gently, "this was drafted by Wachtel. It's not a prenup. It's a declaration of unconditional surrender. He designed this to leave you with nothing. His assets are locked in a Byzantine network of offshore trusts and LLCs that are completely insulated from marital claims. The infidelity clause is actually reversed. It states that any emotional disturbance or public scandal caused by you would void your settlement. If you make a scene, you get zero. You get your clothes, and that's it. Catherine had returned to the Greenwich prison. She was trapped, defeated. The turning point didn't come with a bang. It came on a Tuesday. Marcus was supposedly in Hong Kong. Catherine was in the library trying to read when she heard a familiar laugh from the pool house, a high-pitched, girlish giggle. She walked across the manicured lawn. The lights were on. Through the glass doors she saw him. Marcus, very much not in Hong Kong, was pouring champagne. With him was a young woman in a bikini. It was her cousin, Anya, the 19-year-old she'd paid to fly over from Europe to give her a taste of the good life, to help her with college applications. Catherine stood there frozen as Marcus kissed her. Not a peck, a deep, lingering, possessive kiss. He then saw Catherine through the glass. He didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. He held her cousin tighter, raised his glass in a toast, and smiled. It wasn't the betrayal that broke her. It was the disrespect, the sheer bottomless contempt. He hadn't just cheated. He had defiled the last simple good thing in her life, her family. Something inside Catherine didn't just break, it hardened. The weeping woman died on the lawn that night. The tears dried, replaced by a cold, clear, diamond-hard focus. He thought she was a pretty little idiot. He thought she was an ornament. He'd forgotten she was a researcher. He'd forgotten she had a PhD in spotting exactly where and how value is hidden. She turned around, walked back to the main house, went straight to his private study, the one she was forbidden to enter, and sat down at his desk. "All right, Marcus," she whispered to the empty room. "You have people for numbers." "But so do I." Her war began. For the next 18 months, Catherine Brown lived a double life. To Marcus and his world, she was the perfect, placid wife. She was more beautiful, more serene, more attentive than ever. She planned his parties, charmed his investors, and acted for all the world like a woman who had accepted her gilded cage. Marcus, seeing her newfound compliance, grew bored and even more careless. He left his laptops open, his private server unattended. He saw her as furniture, and you don't hide things from a chair. But at night, when the 30,000-square-foot house fell silent, Catherine was at work. Her PhD in forensic economics wasn't just about art. It was about tracking dark money, understanding shell corporations, and finding the digital fingerprints on illicit transactions. She'd once tracked a stolen Caravaggio through 3 continents by following the whisper of data from Swiss bank accounts to Panamanian law firms. Marcus Thorne's corporate structure was a fortress, but he'd made one mistake. He assumed the fortress only needed to protect him from the outside. Catherine was already inside. She started in his study. He used a state-of-the-art biometric locked server for his Thorne Capital business. She couldn't touch that. But for his personal empire, the web of assets hidden from the IRS, the SEC, and his wife, he used a separate private server, hidden behind a false panel in the library. He thought it was clever. It took her 3 weeks to get past the first firewall. She used social engineering. She watched him. His password, she reasoned, would be built on ego. She tried his birthday. No. His first billion-dollar deal. No. The name of his first company. No. Then she tried the serial number of his first ever car, a 1962 Ferrari 250 GTO he'd bought at a record-breaking auction. Access granted. The server opened up and Catherine fell down a rabbit hole of staggering corruption. It was worse than she could have imagined. Marcus wasn't just a ruthless vulture capitalist. He was a criminal. She found spreadsheets detailing a scheme she mentally dubbed Project Atlas. Marcus was colluding with a ring of international traders to artificially inflate and then short-sell pharmaceutical stocks. He was in essence pump and dumping life-saving drugs. He'd find a promising biotech company, use his offshore entities to quietly buy a massive position fund, a fake research campaign to hype a new drug, and then at the peak dump the stock and simultaneously short it, releasing a second report that the drug trials had failed. He wasn't just making millions. He was destroying companies and, in the process, the hopes of sick people. He was gambling with lives. Catherine's hands shook, but not with fear, with rage. This went beyond her own humiliation. This was monstrous. She began to copy everything. She bought a series of untraceable encrypted solid-state drives. Night after night she downloaded emails, encrypted messages from a secure app called Signal, wire transfer confirmations, and secret ledgers. She compiled it all into a meticulously organized collection she named the Anya file, a little reminder of what started this. She needed to find her leverage. If she just released this, Marcus would be destroyed, but his lawyers would tie her to it. They'd claim she was a disgruntled wife fabricating evidence. She needed something that would prove her case, something that would get her out, and something that would punish him in a way he understood. She dug deeper, tracing the flow of money from Project Atlas. It was a labyrinth. The money flowed from Thorn Capital to a trust in Liechtenstein, then to a bank in Cyprus, then split into a dozen smaller accounts before finally landing in a series of anonymous shell companies in the Cayman Islands. And one name kept appearing over and over: Trident Holdings, LLC. It seemed to be his personal slush fund, the final destination. She searched the Cayman corporate registry. Trident Holdings was registered as a single-asset entity. Its purpose, to hold and maintain luxury collector vehicles. Catherine smiled. She knew exactly which vehicle. The Trident. It was his baby, a $4 million one-of-a-kind Pagani Huayra Roadster with a bespoke carbon fiber body and an interior stitched with platinum thread. He'd flown to Italy half a dozen times to oversee its creation. It wasn't just a car to him. It was a symbol of his virility, his power, his connoisseurship. He loved it more than any human being. She kept digging. And then she found the final devastating piece of the puzzle. Trident Holdings wasn't just holding the car was the cover. In the last 6 months, as Project Atlas reached its peak, Marcus had started funneling the proceeds of the fraud into the LLC's bank account, using the car's maintenance and transport as a cover for massive multi-million-dollar wire transfers. The LLC that legally held his favorite toy was also the primary repository for over $200 million in illicit cash. Marcus, in his supreme arrogance, had tied his two favorite things together: his ego and his stolen money. He'd hidden his crimes in plain sight, disguised as his most obnoxious hobby. Catherine leaned back from the glowing screen. The sun was coming up over the Greenwich estate, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. She had it. She had him. She didn't just have leverage for a divorce. She had a nuke. The question was how to use it. She didn't just want money. She'd seen what money did. She wanted justice. And she wanted to see the look on his face when the ornament he'd dismissed dismantled his entire world. She closed the laptop, went upstairs, and got into bed next to her sleeping husband. She didn't sleep. She just lay there watching him, and for the first time in a decade, she smiled. The silence in the Wachtell Lipton conference room was no longer sterile. It was toxic. It stretched for 10 seconds, then 20. David Cobry, the unflappable legal shark, was staring at the one-page asset transfer document as if it were written in ancient Sumerian. Trident Holdings. Cobry repeated, his legal mind racing, trying to find the trap. Mr. Thorne, what is this asset? It's not on the marital balance sheet you provided. Marcus Thorne was rigid. His face was a mask of polite fury. He had built an empire on the principle of never being surprised. And his wife, his trophy, had just blindsided him in a room full of his own billion-dollar lawyers. It's a holding company, Marcus said, his voice dangerously low. A trinket, as she said. It holds a car. A car. Cobry looked relieved. Just a car, Mrs. Thorne. We can easily assign a value to the vehicle and add it to your settlement. A 2017 Pagani. Say $3.5 million generous market value. He was already reaching for his pen to amend the main document. No, Catherine said, her voice still quiet, but now it cut through the room like a scalpel. I don't want the value. I want the LLC. I want the asset. Cobry stopped. This was irregular. That's not how this is done. Transferring an offshore entity is complex. It's a tax nightmare. It makes no sense. Why would you want the company? Just take the car. Because I like the name, Catherine said lightly. Marcus snapped. Stop playing games, Catherine. What do you want? I told you, she said, looking him dead in the eye. I want Trident Holdings. You sign that paper, I sign these. It's that simple. Cobry looked at his client. Marcus, is there a problem? It's just a car. Let her have the damn car. Let her have the LLC. It's a $3.5 million concession to close the deal. It's a rounding error. But Marcus wasn't looking at Cobry. He was staring at Catherine, a sickening, dawning horror spreading across his features. He understood. He didn't know how she knew, but he knew she knew. What do you know about that company? He growled. I know it's where you keep your favorite toy, Catherine said. Marcus. Cobry interjected, his voice hardening. Is there something about this asset I should be aware of? You provided us with a full and frank financial disclosure. If this Trident Holdings contains other assets you failed to disclose. The legal malpractice alarm was ringing in Cobry's head. He had built his reputation on his client's honesty, at least their honesty with him. It's nothing, Marcus snapped. It's a clean entity. It holds the car. That's it. He was lying. And he was a terrible liar. He never had to be good at it. He usually just bullied his way through. Then sign it, Catherine said. This is blackmail, one of the younger Skadden lawyers blurted out. Catherine's own lawyer, Rebecca Shaw, a quiet, ruthless bulldog Catherine had hired from a small boutique litigation firm, finally spoke. It is not blackmail, counsel, Rebecca said, her voice crisp. It is a counteroffer. My client is willing to sign away all claims to a multi-billion-dollar estate in exchange for this one single worthless LLC. An LLC you just confirmed on the record holds nothing but a depreciating vehicle. I'd say that's the deal of the century for Mr. Thorne. The trap was sprung. It was perfect. If Marcus signed, he would be handing Catherine the keys to his entire criminal kingdom. He'd be giving her the bank account with $200 million in it. If he refused to sign, he would be admitting in front of his entire legal team that he had lied. That the LLC was not just a car. That he had hidden marital assets and committed perjury on his financial disclosures. He would be invalidating the entire divorce proceeding, invalidating the prenup, and opening himself up to a full, invasive, court-ordered forensic audit of his entire empire. And Cobry, to save his own reputation, would be the first to insist on it. Marcus Thorne was trapped between ruin and annihilation. He looked at Catherine, the woman he'd called his little ornament for a decade. Her expression was calm, serene, and completely unreadable. You, he whispered, his voice thick with a hatred so potent it was almost physical. You bitch. Catherine didn't flinch. I've been called worse. Mostly by you in your own home. She picked up the expensive gold-plated fountain pen from the center of the table. She uncapped it and placed the cap neatly beside the signature page of his settlement. The scraps. Sign my paper, Marcus, she said. Or we can have Mr. Cobry here schedule the deposition for your forensic accountants. And while we're at it, we can subpoena the Project Atlas files. I'm sure the SEC would be fascinated to learn about your biotech adventures. David Cobry's head snapped toward Marcus. Project what? The color drained from Marcus's face. He was white. He was finished. Where is the Anya file? He hissed, his voice barely audible. Catherine's smile widened. "Anya, my cousin." "I don't know what you're talking about, Marcus. I'm just a simple woman who wants her husband's car for sentimental reasons. Now, sign." With a trembling hand, Marcus Thorne picked up the pen. He looked at the asset transfer document. His entire life, his $12 billion empire, his reputation, his freedom, all of it balanced on the tip of this pen. He looked at his lawyers, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning panic. He looked at Catherine, her eyes as cold and brilliant as the diamonds he'd once draped her in. The click of the nib on the paper was the loudest sound Catherine had ever heard. He signed his name, Marcus A. Thorne. The signature was jagged angry, a wound on the page. He threw the pen down. It skittered across the mahogany and hit the floor. Catherine calmly took the signed transfer, reviewed the signature, and handed it to her lawyer, Rebecca, who slipped it into a briefcase with a quiet, professional snap. Then Catherine took the fountain pen from the floor, picked up the divorce settlement, and signed her name. Catherine Brown Rostova. She pushed the stack of papers back toward David Cobry. "It's been a pleasure, gentlemen," she said, standing up. Catherine adjusted the strap of her tote bag on her shoulder. She and Rebecca Shaw began walking toward the door. "Wait," Marcus said. His voice was hollow. Catherine paused, her hand on the heavy brass door handle, but she did not turn around. "The file," he said. "The Anya file. Give it to me. Now." We had a deal. Catherine turned slowly. She regarded him not with hatred or even pity, but with a kind of detached curiosity, the way a scientist might regard a specimen in a jar. "What file, Marcus?" "The one with the wire transfers to Cyprus. The encrypted signal logs with your trading partners in Singapore. The spreadsheets detailing the Project Atlas pump and dump. The one with the audio file of you on the phone with Senator McRae, promising him a very healthy donation in exchange for him killing the FDA inquiry. That file." David Cobry looked like he was going to be physically ill. He was already backing away from Marcus as if from a plague carrier. "Marcus, what have you done?" Marcus ignored him, his eyes locked on Catherine. "Give it to me." "Oh, Marcus," Catherine said, and she laughed. It was not a happy sound. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated release. "You still think this is a negotiation. You still think you're in control." She stepped back toward the table. "You think this was about the money? You think I went through all of this? Just for $200 million, I lived in your house for 10 years, Marcus. I could have skimmed that much from the housekeeping budget if I'd had a mind to." She leaned down, placing her hands on the polished table, getting close to him. "This," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "was about justice. It was about the families who lost their savings because you shorted their company into oblivion. It was about the patients who died waiting for a drug that you destroyed for a payday. It was about me, the lovely little idiot you humiliated for a decade. And it was about my 19-year-old cousin whose life you tried to ruin just to spite me." "The file," he choked out. "The file—" Catherine stood up straight. "The Anya file was delivered by secure courier to 2 places 4 hours ago. The moment my lawyer confirmed your wire transfer for the initial $5 million settlement, the scraps was in escrow. The packages were sent." Marcus's eyes widened in sheer uncomprehending terror. "1 copy," Catherine continued, ticking a finger, "went to Stephanie Avakian at the SEC's Division of Enforcement. I believe she'll be very interested in Project Atlas. I even included a helpful flowchart." She ticked a second finger. "And the 2nd copy, the one with the really juicy bits about Senator McRae and the illegal campaign contributions. That one went to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. I'm not sure who's handling it, but the name Preet Bharara seems to stick in my mind. He has such a wonderful reputation for dealing with Wall Street corruption." Marcus Thorne stopped breathing. He was no longer a billionaire. He was a man in a cage, and the bars had just slammed shut. You... He couldn't form the words. What you just signed, Catherine said, gesturing to the paper in Rebecca's briefcase, wasn't a deal. It wasn't blackmail. It was a parting gift. You see, I knew the feds would eventually freeze all your assets. All of them. The houses, the art, the bank accounts. And that $200 million in the Trident LLC. That's evidence. It's gone. They'll seize it by morning. She smiled, that devastating smile returning in full force. But they're not a repo company. They don't care about the car. And since you so very kindly signed the LLC over to me, and I just filed the transfer of title with the Cayman Registry via my lawyer's encrypted portal, the Pagani is mine. The only thing of value you have left in the world that the feds won't get their hands on. She had done it. She had burned his entire corrupt empire to the ground. She had taken everything from him. His money, his freedom, his reputation. And in exchange, she'd left him with a $5 million divorce settlement, and she'd taken his favorite toy. You're ruined, Marcus, she said simply. You're just the last one to know. She turned and walked out of the conference room. Rebecca Shaw followed, closing the door softly behind them, leaving Marcus Thorne alone in his glass tower with his panicked $2,000 an hour lawyers listening to the distant approaching sound of sirens. The elevator ride down from the 30th floor was a vacuum. The silent wood-paneled box descended, and Catherine felt the pressure change not just in her ears, but in her very soul. The 30th floor conference room, with its toxic, pressurized silence of warring egos, had been a battlefield. This elevator was a decompression chamber. Beside her, Rebecca Shaw was completely still, her gaze fixed on the glowing descending numbers. Her face, which had been a mask of prosecutorial steel upstairs, was now pale, the adrenaline draining away, leaving only a profound, vibrating awe. The doors chimed softly, a polite, almost comical sound after the magnitude of what had just transpired. They opened onto the vast, cavernous lobby of the 51st Street Tower. It was a cathedral of gray-veined marble and towering, lifeless ficus trees. Men and women in expensive suits rushed past, their eyes glued to phones, their minds on trades and meetings, oblivious to the fact that one of their gods had just been struck from the sky. Catherine and Rebecca walked in unison, their heels clicking in a sharp, steady rhythm on the polished stone. They stopped near the revolving doors, a small island of stillness in the rushing current of high finance. Well? Rebecca said, her voice low. She adjusted the heavy leather briefcase that contained the single most expensive piece of paper in New York City. That was... She searched for the word. Biblical. I've seen hostile takeovers. I've seen corporate raids. What you just did, Ms. Rostova, that was a regime change. You were essential, Rebecca. You never flinched, Catherine said, turning to her. Rebecca gave a short, sharp nod. The professionalism was back, a shield slamming into place. As of this moment, our attorney-client privilege is a fortress. But I'm going to my office. I am taking every piece of digital and physical communication we have ever shared, and I'm going to have it professionally incinerated. My retainer was paid in full from the escrow account. Our communications never existed. I understand, Catherine said. For all intents and purposes, Rebecca continued, I was a simple divorce attorney who negotiated a modest settlement against an ironclad prenup. You are a client I will never speak of or to again. Do you understand me? Perfectly. Good. Rebecca extended a hand. Her grip was firm, dry, and strong. I don't know where you're going, Ms. Rostova, but I suspect you will do just fine. The same to you, Rebecca. They released their grip. It was a final, silent acknowledgement. Two allies in a covert war now dissolving their pact. Rebecca Shaw turned left, her sensible heels clicking toward the subway entrance, disappearing back into the anonymous workaday world. Catherine turned right. She pushed through the heavy glass of the revolving door, and the city hit her. The air wasn't the sterile, filtered, temperature-controlled atmosphere of Marcus's tower. It was real. It was sharp, cool, and alive, smelling of damp pretzels, diesel exhaust, and the faint, sweet scent of roasted nuts from a street cart. For 10 years she had moved through this city in the armored bubble of a chauffeured Maybach. Now her feet were on the pavement. She was just another woman in a navy dress, and the anonymity was the most intoxicating, luxurious feeling she had ever known. She didn't hail a cab. She walked. She walked the 2 blocks south and 1 block east, her pace quick and purposeful. She arrived at the discreet, unmarked entrance to the private subterranean garage. It was less a parking garage and more a bank vault, a climate-controlled concrete fortress where Marcus kept his city cars, the vehicles too rare and expensive to be left at the Greenwich estate. She pressed the intercom. A moment later a buzzer sounded and a heavy windowless steel door slid open. She descended the concrete ramp into the quiet, brightly lit space. It was silent save for the hum of industrial-grade ventilation. A row of sleeping beasts sat under custom-fitted silk covers. A black Rolls-Royce Phantom, a silver Aston Martin DB11, a vintage Ferrari 275 GTB in classic red. The attendant, a man in his 50s named Miguel, came out of his small glass booth wiping his hands on a rag. He looked surprised, then nervous. Catherine was never here, and she was never here alone. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Thorne," he said, a note of caution in his voice. He was a good man, a man Marcus treated like a piece of the furniture, a man Catherine had always made a point to ask about his children. "It's Ms. Rostova now, Miguel," she said, her voice kind but firm. It was the first time she had used her maiden name with a stranger. It felt solid, correct. Miguel's brow furrowed in confusion. "Oh, is Mr. Thorne joining you?" He did not call down. "No, he's not," Catherine said. She reached into her simple leather tote bag. "I'm afraid I won't be Mrs. Thorne's problem any longer. And Mr. Thorne won't be mine." She pulled out the single key fob she'd taken from Marcus's desk drawer 3 months prior, the one he'd spent a week raging about blaming the idiot staff for losing. And she pulled out the folded, notarized asset transfer document. "I'll be taking the Trident today, Miguel, permanently." Miguel's eyes went wide with a sudden, genuine fear. He physically recoiled. "Ms. Rostova, I cannot. Please, you know the rule. Mr. Thorne, no one is allowed to touch that car. He'd have my job. Please." "He can't," Catherine said gently. "He has no more authority over this garage. He has no more authority over you, and he has no more authority over me." She didn't argue. She didn't plead. She simply unfolded the document and held it out. Miguel hesitated, then took it. He was a man who parked cars, but he lived in a world of power. He might not have understood the legal intricacies of Trident Holdings, LLC, but he knew 2 things instantly: the imposing embossed letterhead of Wachtell, Lipton, Rosen & Katz, and the furious, jagged, unmistakable signature of Marcus A. Thorne at the bottom. He looked from the paper to the key fob in her other hand, and then up to her face. He saw her calm, steady gaze. He remembered the number of times he'd had to clean champagne flutes and smeared lipstick out of the Maybach. He remembered the way Mr. Thorne had spoken to this woman, a tone of casual, brutal dismissal that always made Miguel flinch. The power dynamic of his entire world had just inverted. A slow, knowing grin spread across his face. It was the smile of a man who was just told the revolution was over and his side had won. "Yes, ma'am, Miss Rostova," he said, the Mrs. Thorne forgotten. He handed the paper back, his entire demeanor changed. He was no longer a nervous servant. He was an accomplice. "I'll bring it right around. It is in the climate bay." He hurried off, not to the main floor, but to a heavy insulated steel door at the far end of the garage, which he unlocked with a separate key. The door hissed open, revealing a smaller private room. Catherine waited. A moment later she heard it. It was not the polite purr of a luxury sedan. It was a deep, guttural, angry rumble, the sound of a caged beast waking up. The Pagani Huayra Roadster rolled out of the bay, its metallic exposed carbon fiber body seeming to drink the fluorescent light and swallow it whole. It was an obscene, magnificent thing. It wasn't a car. It was a $4 million statement of profound arrogance, a sculpture of aerodynamics and ego. Every line was aggressive, every vent and wing functional. It looked less like it was built for the road and more like it was designed to achieve orbit. It idled in front of her, the Mercedes-AMG V12 engine snarling, the quad exhaust sounding a low, menacing baritone that vibrated in Catherine's chest. Miguel got out and walked over to her, his eyes shining. She's got a full tank, Miss Rostova. Mr. Thorne always kept her ready. He liked to look at it. He walked to the passenger side and opened the dramatic butterfly door which rose up like a broken wing. He then walked around and opened the driver's side for her. "Thank you, Miguel," she said. She slid into the driver's seat. The cockpit was a cocoon of brushed aluminum, exposed carbon, and leather stitched with platinum thread. It was absurd. And it smelled faintly of Marcus's overbearing cologne, a $600 bottle of Baccarat Rouge 540. It was the last trace of him. She looked at the complex watch-like instrumentation. She knew exactly what to do. She'd studied the manual online for weeks. "One last thing," she said to Miguel. She pointed to the 2 carbon fiber roof panels latched above her. "Can you help me take these off?" Miguel's grin widened. "Yes, ma'am." Together they unlatched the 2 lightweight panels. Catherine would not be driving this thing in a sealed bubble. She was going to feel the wind. They stored them neatly in the front compartment. The car was now a pure open-top roadster. Catherine sat back down, her hands gripping the sculpted wheel. She put on a simple pair of black Ray-Ban sunglasses, the ones Marcus hated, the ones he called common. She looked at Miguel, who was standing clear watching her with an expression of pure, unadulterated delight. She pulled a folded-over stack of bills from her tote bag, 5 $100 bills. "For your family, Miguel, and for your silence. Thank you." He took the money, his eyes wide, and tucked it deep into his pocket. "Good luck, Miss Rostova," he said, his voice earnest. "Drive safe. She's got a lot of kick." "Oh, I know," Catherine said. "I'm counting on it." Her foot in its simple navy blue heel touched the accelerator. She didn't press it. She just tapped it. The engine screamed. It was not a roar. It was a shriek, a primal, violent explosion of sound that bounced off the concrete walls, rattling the light fixtures. It was the sound of 12 cylinders and $4 million worth of rage being uncaged. Catherine smiled just a little. She put the car in gear. The transmission clicked, a solid mechanical sound. Slowly, deliberately, she eased off the brake and the car began to roll, the bare carbon fiber gliding over the smooth concrete. She headed for the exit ramp, the bright, unforgiving square of daylight waiting for her at the top. She was ascending from the tomb. The Pagani climbed the steep concrete ramp, its snarling V12 engine note compressing in the narrow tunnel before exploding outward, a defiant war cry hurled against the afternoon sky. The car burst onto 51st Street, a blur of bare carbon fiber surfacing in a sea of yellow taxis and black town cars. The transition was jarring. From the cool, tomb-like silence of the subterranean garage, she was thrust into the full sensory assault of Midtown Manhattan. The sun was blinding, reflecting off the glass canyons of the surrounding skyscrapers. The air, now that the roof was off, rushed over her, carrying the chaotic symphony of the city horns blaring a distant siren, the rumble of a passing bus. But the Pagani's engine, even at a near idle, drowned it all out, a deep, menacing thrum that was a center of gravity all its own. Pedestrians froze. Heads snapped around, conversations stopped mid-sentence. People on the sidewalk fumbled for their phones, their faces a mixture of awe and disbelief, trying to capture the $1 million spaceship that had just materialized in their world. Catherine didn't floor it. She didn't squeal the tires. She drove with the same cold, perfect precision she had used to dismantle his life. Her hands were steady on the carbon fiber wheel. She eased the car into the flow of traffic, the snarling engine a constant physical presence at her back. She navigated the crosstown traffic, a shark gliding through a school of minnows. She drove 1 block and turned onto Park Avenue. She pulled to a stop at the red light at 52nd Street. The light was long, and there directly across the intersection was the tower. Her eyes lifted from the road to the gleaming dark glass facade of Marcus's headquarters. She looked up past the 10th floor, past the 20th, to the 30th floor conference room. His window, the one that looked south down the magnificent canyon of Park Avenue. She knew he'd be there. He was a creature of ego, and his ego would have demanded he watch. He would be unable to comprehend his own defeat, drawn to the window like a moth to a flame, needing to see the impossible reality of his ornament driving away with his prize. And there he was, a small dark silhouette, rigid and unmoving, pressed against the glass. Even from 30 floors down she could feel the rage. It was a palpable, pulsing thing, a dark energy radiating from the tower, a silent, primal scream of a king who had just been checkmated by a pawn. He was trapped in his glass box, his empire collapsing around him, his lawyers likely already screaming at each other about malpractice and full disclosure. He was a prisoner watching his freedom drive away. Catherine sat in the open cockpit, her face turned up toward his. She was exposed to the air, to the city, to him. She didn't hide. She wanted him to see her calm, to see her in the driver's seat of the one thing he loved, the $4 million symbol of his illicit power, the very asset he'd tried to hide. The light turned green. Catherine didn't look up at him again. She looked forward. She pressed the accelerator. The Pagani leapt. It did not accelerate. It detonated. The 754 horsepower engine screamed, the rear tires bit the asphalt, and the force of the launch pinned her to the leather seat. The sound was a glorious, defiant shriek that ripped through the polite hum of Park Avenue, a sound of pure, unadulterated power. It was the sound of his power, now hers, and she was using it to leave him behind forever. She shot down the avenue, weaving through the traffic with an economist's precision. 51st, 50th, 49th. In the small vibrating side view mirror she caught a glimpse of her own reflection. Her blonde hair, which had been in a severe controlled chignon, was coming undone, torn loose by the wind rushing into the open cockpit. Strands of it whipped across her face, stinging her cheeks. Her eyes, hidden behind the common Ray-Bans, were clear and bright. And on her lips there was a smile. It wasn't a smile of joy or even of giddy victory. It was a smile of peace. The smile of a researcher who had finally, after 10 long years, balanced the equation. The smile of an architect who had just stepped back to watch her perfectly designed, inescapable prison snap shut on its intended occupant. She wasn't driving into the sunset. She wasn't driving to a new apartment in Tribeca. She was driving straight toward the Lincoln Tunnel. The car, this magnificent, vulgar, beautiful machine, was the final piece of the plan. She had no intention of keeping it. Driving it felt like sitting in his skin. The faint, lingering scent of his Baccarat Rouge cologne in the leather made her stomach turn. No, this car was not a trophy. It was the last untraceable piece of liquidity. She had a buyer. A Saudi prince, a man she'd met at one of Marcus's obsequious galas, a man who despised Marcus but openly coveted the trident. The deal had been struck 2 months ago in a series of encrypted messages. A private cargo flight was already booked and waiting at a private hangar at Teterboro Airport. The wire transfer for $4.2 million a premium for its story was already waiting in a new bank under a new name in a Swiss canton that did not ask questions. Catherine Rostova wasn't just an ex-wife. She was an architect. She had designed his prison, and she had designed her own escape funded by his own arrogance. As she sped toward the tunnel, the magnificent New York skyline retreating behind her, she reached over and pressed a button on the complex console. The stereo system came to life. It was set to his station, of course. A blast of classical music filled the cockpit. Vivaldi's The Four Seasons. Summer. She turned it up, loud. The frenetic, stormy strings of the Presto movement mixed with the roar of the V-12, a perfect soundtrack for her liberation. For the first time in a decade, she let her head fall back against the headrest, closed her eyes for just a second, and let the wind and the music wash her clean. She didn't just get the car, she got justice. Catherine Rostova's story is a brutal, modern-day masterpiece of revenge, proving that the person you underestimate the most is often the one holding the detonation codes. She didn't just leave him, she dismantled him using his own arrogance and corruption as her weapons. The smile as she signed those papers wasn't defeat, it was the final move in a game of chess he never even knew he was playing. What do you think? Was this the ultimate revenge or a cold, calculated plot? Catherine burned his empire to the ground and drove off in the ashes. If you love this story of power betrayal and ultimate vindication, please hit that like button. Let us know in the comments what you think Marcus Thorne's first day in prison was like. And don't forget to share this with anyone who loves a story where the queen finally topples the king. Most importantly, subscribe to our channel. We have so many more stories like this one coming your way, and you won't want to miss a single one.